Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I call this meeting of the NCUA Board to order. I want to note for the record that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, today's meeting is open to the public through a live webcast only. The public may access the meeting by visiting the agency's homepage at www.ncua.gov and clicking on the provided webcast link. Additionally, presenters in today's webcast meeting are participating remotely. So if we experience any technical difficulties, I ask for your patience. If you would like to view the closed captioning of this meeting, please click on the CC icon located in the lower left corner of the WebEx window. You may also change the layout to one of your choosing by clicking on the layout option on the top right side of your screen. Our recommended viewing option for this meeting is the stack view. Now, turning to the first and only item of business today is a board briefing on the post-exam feedback survey update. Staff presenting are Shamika Sutton, Ombudsman, Office of the Executive Director, and Robert Parrish, Acting Director, Office of Business Innovation. Good morning, Shamika and Robert. You may begin whenever you are ready.
Good morning, Chairman Harper, Vice Chairman Hoffman, and Board Member Hood. I am Shamika Sutton, the Ombudsman for the National Credit Union Administration. As the Ombudsman of the agency, I serve as the designated neutral appointed by the Chairman to facilitate informal resolution regarding adverse feedback or concerns of stakeholders. With me today is Robert Parrish from the Office of Business Innovation. We are here today to provide an update on the post-examination survey pilot. I will start with the background, statistics, and overall results of the survey. As part of NCUA's strategic objective to provide effective and efficient supervision, the agency set a goal to improve examination quality by incorporating a relevant feedback, internal and external stakeholders. Next slide, please. Beginning on September 20th, 2021 through March 31st, 2022, Federal Credit Union managers or CEOs received a post-examination survey from NCUA's Office of the Ombudsman at the conclusion of a regular examination. The NCUA piloted a new post-examination survey which allowed credit unions to provide feedback to the agency while helping to standardize the feedback process. Such feedback helps the NCUA evaluate the effectiveness of our examination processes and also improves communication with credit unions. The industry was made aware of the survey via Letter to Credit Union 21 FCU 05, which emphasized that participation in the survey pilot was optional. To maintain separation from NCUA staff who conducted the examination, the Office of the Ombudsman administered the collection of survey responses. My office was also responsible for reviewing survey responses, consolidating data from responses, and reporting the results to NCUA leadership. Survey distribution and survey responses were collected through SurveyMonkey and were not used to evaluate the results of individual examinations. Next slide, please. 3 iterations of the survey were distributed amongst participants, which included 5 binary yes or no questions focused on pre-examination, reporting, and post-examination requirements. The survey also included an open-ended question which asked participants for the types of questions the agency could consider in a future survey. I will now transition to discuss the results and statistics of the post-exam survey pilot. During the pilot phase, 1,058 surveys were distributed to every credit union for which an examination was completed. Each survey participant typically spent 1 minute and 13 seconds completing the survey. Of the 1,058 surveys distributed, the agency received 186 responses from credit unions, resulting in a 17% response rate. Again, responses to the survey were optional, and the remaining responses to the survey came from respective examiners in charge, totaling 6%. The overall combined response for credit unions and examiners on the post-exam survey pilot was 23%. While the response rate was moderate and yet reasonable, the overall feedback was useful, necessary, and positive. Next slide, please. More specifically, all but one question with responses from credit unions received at least a 90% positive response. For example, 100% of survey participants responded that the examiner always consulted with credit union management concerning timeframes for providing requested pre-exam data and information. In addition, 100% of survey participants responded that exam review areas always included those that pose the highest risk to their institutions. At least 98% of credit union participants responded that examiners offered to keep management or the CEO updated throughout the exam. As mentioned earlier, the one question resulting in less than a 90% response is listed as question number 8, and specifically asks if a reference to the applicable law, NCUA rules and regulations, gap, or other binding standard or requirement was provided for all documented resolution items included in the final examination report. As noted, 61% of credit union participants answered yes, while 37% of credit union participants answered not applicable. The percentage of not applicable responses reflect that credit union participants who responded to this question did not receive a document of resolution, which gives more context to the adverse response. Relevant to the feedback from question number 5 regarding appeals, it appears the NCUA has done a fairly good job of making credit unions aware of their appeal rights. However, as a reminder, information on a credit union's right to an appeal can be found on the cover page of the examination report, as well as NCUA rules and regulations 12 CFR Part 746, Subpart A. For question number 12, 9% of credit union participants responded that examination reports are not received within 10 days. After analyzing the data and speaking with focus groups, the no responses are likely isolated and attributed to the agency's remote posture and adjustments associated with the virtual exam. Next slide, please. Another objective of the pilot was to solicit the types of questions and participants would like to answer on future surveys. Examples of questions included: what could have been done better during the examination? Did the credit union find the examination useful? How did the examiner interact with staff and credit union board of directors? And were there any inefficiencies or difficulties with the off-site exam process? The primary purpose of the pilot was not necessarily the results, but the implementation and facilitation of the process. However, the information collected during the analysis of the results was pivotal. This concludes the background, statistics, and overall results portion of the post-examination survey pilot. I will now turn it over to Robert Parrish, who will discuss insights, additional feedback, and the path forward for post-examination surveys.
Thank you, Shamika. Next slide, please. I would like to discuss the insights and feedback gained during the post-exam survey pilot. We worked with 2 focus groups in recent months to gather input into a future post-exam survey. Valuable input and feedback was provided by a focus group of NCUA field supervisors and examiners, and a focus group of CEOs and senior staff from federal credit unions representing a wide range of asset sizes. Both focus groups provided input regarding qualitative questions that should be included in the survey. In addition, both groups voiced the importance of the agency clearly communicating plans for dissemination and distribution of survey results. Additional feedback indicated the agency should consider how credit union asset size may determine how certain questions should be worded in the survey. We also learned the value of using a third party to administer the survey. Using a third party to administer the survey helps to provide control over distribution of survey results, provides anonymity to survey respondents, and helps to improve response rate. We will continue to explore this and other ways of increasing participation in a post-exam survey, including options to automate the survey process and expand survey reporting. Next slide, please. As we continue to evaluate the feedback from our 2 focus groups, we are continuing the current pilot as we work towards the final plan for a permanent survey process. One of the current priorities in the planning process is to determine the next iteration of questions for the post-exam survey. Another important priority is evaluating third-party vendors and software providers that will help in the successful implementation in a permanent survey process and encourage credit union participation in the process. Finally, we understand the importance of communication for all involved in the survey process, including examiners and credit unions. We are exploring the possibility of a dedicated page on the agency website to provide details of the post-exam survey, to include providing a list of the survey questions the agency will use. Thank you for the opportunity to provide this important update. I now invite any questions you may have for us.
Thank you, Robert and Shamika, for your informative presentation on the National Credit Union Administration's post-examination survey pilot and the next steps to refine this new feedback mechanism. Shamika, I also understand that this briefing was your maiden voyage at the NCUA board table. Congratulations, you did very well. Since joining the NCUA board 18 months ago, Vice Chairman Hauptman has advocated for ways credit unions can provide constructive feedback on the agency's examinations. I would like to thank him for this idea and his leadership in advancing this initiative. This successful pilot has demonstrated for me the value of collecting such stakeholder feedback, and we had much higher participation rates than prior efforts to assess examination performance. The NCUA's field examiners play a critical role in protecting credit union members, the system, and the National Credit Union Share Insurance Fund. Our examiners rely on training, experience, and most importantly, good judgment when conducting examinations. In many ways, our examiners act like referees and umpires who must make calls on balls, strikes, fouls, and activities that are out of bounds. Being a referee is about fairness and making the right call. It is often a thankless and at times a difficult and disparaged job. Like the evolution of refereeing in professional sports with instant replays and immediate external reviews of on-the-court calls, the NCUA has invested in technology and developed new procedures in recent years. These changes have sought to improve the effectiveness of the examination program, increase the fairness of examinations, and decrease subjectivity in examination reports. For example, the agency implemented the National Supervision Policy Manual to ensure greater exam consistency across the country. We also improved examiner training, developed analytical dashboards, approved regulations that clarify the role of supervisory guidance, and established procedures like requiring documents of resolution to link to a specific regulation. Additionally, we now include details about the agency's appeals process in all examination reports, as Shamika noted. And the NCUA has enhanced quality control reviews to ensure examiner findings are well documented, well written, and consistent with the agency's operational policies. Yet, there remains the perception by some within the credit union industry of inconsistency and micromanagement in NCUA examinations. This perception is partly expected due to the nature of the examination process. Nevertheless, the NCUA can and should seek to incorporate the feedback of credit unions and make appropriate improvements in the process. Since last September, federal credit union managers and CEOs have received the piloted post-examination survey from the NCUA's ombudsman after their credit union's regular examination. As noted today, we deployed 3 different surveys as part of this pilot. Each survey included 5 questions on the topics of pre-examination, reporting, and post-examination requirements, and 1 open-ended question to obtain feedback on questions the agency should consider for a permanent survey in the future. When a post-examination survey was proposed and later approved as part of the 2021 budget, I expressed some skepticism because prior post-examination surveys had received few responses and was ultimately not cost efficient. However, the new post-examination survey that the NCUA has piloted is well crafted, and it has provided valuable feedback on the agency's program. And the survey's results demonstrate that examiners are overall performing well. Before recognizing others, I do have 3 questions for you, Shamika and Robert. First, Shamika, in your presentation, you noted that 186 stakeholders responded to the survey, and you said that was about 17% of credit unions. What is a reasonable response rate for a survey like this one? What statistical baseline should the NCUA strive for to improve the examination program's survey going forward?
Thank you, Chairman Harper, for your question. As mentioned, statistical validity is the extent to which the conclusions drawn from a statistical test are accurate and reliable. To achieve statistical validity, there must be an adequate sample size. In this case, our universe of 1,058 was the sample size, as randomness did not exist in the distribution of surveys. Therefore, our universe is sufficiently valid to make reasonable inferences regarding the presentation of positive feedback. To emphasize, the survey was voluntary and optional, so there may be some bias. However, we are reasonably confident that the conclusions drawn from the survey are representative of the feedback given by participants. The credit union response rate between 15 to 20% is consistent with what we can expect from these types of surveys. That concludes my response.
Thank you for clarifying those points. And when you were developing and implementing the pilot, what did you learn from other regulators that also have post-examination surveys? I believe you spoke to the OCC and the FDIC. What lessons can we learn from their experiences?
I can take that question, Chairman Harper. In the beginning stages of planning for the survey pilot, we reached out to sister agencies, as you mentioned, and we discussed their survey processes. In those discussions, we know that most manage the survey process from the Office of the Ombudsman in the other agencies. This allows for that separation from the regular examination process that Shamika talked about in her opening comments. The main lesson learned from the discussion with the other agencies is that using a third-party provider to facilitate the survey on behalf of the agency would likely lead to increased participation in the survey process, as it would provide confirmation around how the survey is being disseminated, and it also allows for anonymity if desired. That concludes my response to your question.
Robert, thank you for those observations. My last question is, how can the NCUA minimize costs and maximize responses to the post-examination survey going forward?
Thanks, Chairman Harper. I can take that question as well. In the current planning phase for a future survey process, we are exploring all available options in order to minimize cost and also ensure a response rate that allows for maximum benefit for credit unions, the agency, and the efforts to ensure transparent and effective communication between NCUA and credit unions. We will explore options with various software providers, third-party service providers, and consider other options that would allow NCUA to accomplish our goals with the survey process while minimizing cost. That concludes my response to your question.
Thank you, Robert. I really do appreciate that consideration, which I believe is critical to ensuring this promising post-examination survey does not one day turn into an irrelevant and ineffective exercise. There is one other final point that I would like to make before closing. As the NCUA continues to conduct the post-examination survey, we should always remember that the examination program's primary goal is to protect credit union members, the system, and the Share Insurance Fund. Avoiding even the appearance of regulatory capture is in the best interest of the taxpayers who guarantee the Share Insurance Fund. The NCUA must also always remain a neutral referee when calling the balls, the strikes, as it sees them. Fairness is not always popular, but it is essential for maintaining a safe, fair, strong, and sound credit union system. That concludes my remarks. I now recognize Vice Chairman Hauptman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your kind remarks about my involvement in this. I want to say thank you to Robert and Shamika for this report and all the work you and others have put into this. I imagine it feels good to work on a true improvement in communication and customer service. This feedback survey, along with recording of exit exams, was one of my main priorities during my NCUA term here. As you can imagine, it's very gratifying to see this in action. I can tell you that I noted how quickly and eagerly everybody at NCUA jumped on this project and delivered. I suppose one reason that NCUA and credit unions immediately got it is because every day all of us use similar customer service feedback mechanisms in our daily life: Uber, DoorDash, TripAdvisor. And we know you can't even check out of your hotel for an hour before you get that email that says, "How was your stay? Click here to rate your experience." And everybody at the hotel knows you're going to get it. So miscommunications get dealt with quickly. There's constant improvement on everyone's part. And it's why the cars we use for Uber and other rideshare services are normally cleaner than old school taxis. It's not because the people have changed. Many rideshare drivers used to drive cabs, and we, the passengers, haven't changed. The Ubers are cleaner because after every single ride, both the rider and passenger rate their experience. And right there at the top of the Uber app, we are asked to rate the car's cleanliness. So does the driver. Those words are not chosen accidentally. They communicate priorities. Thus, Uber drivers keep cars cleaner, and they get the benefit of passengers being more conscientious in someone else's vehicle. In a similar vein, NCUA examiners are crucial to the success of this survey, since they'll fill out the survey themselves and have valuable insight into how we should tweak things in the future. Today's briefing on this outstanding new communication tool, for me, is partly the result of my frustration. In my prior job on Capitol Hill, it was difficult to solve problems between regulated entities and their regulators. Why? Because people were afraid to speak directly to their regulator, partly because the regulators didn't appear to be particularly interested in feedback. Constituents couldn't not notice that the regulator wasn't doing all of the normal modern mechanisms to ensure quality service. Calls were not monitored for quality assurance. There were none of the immediate feedback surveys that most organizations, including the regulated institutions, utilize daily to improve customer service. In most of the cases when I was on the Hill, the regulator thought everything was working just fine, while the regulated institution was too afraid to tell them otherwise. When we on Capitol Hill got calls from constituents about their regulators, we were usually told, "Please don't tell the regulator my name." Constituents noticed things, such as regulators punishing companies for not recording client calls, yet the same regulators refused to allow themselves to be recorded. As you can imagine, all these barriers made it harder to solve problems. The regulators often acted bewildered as to why these folks would talk to Congress, but wouldn't raise the issue directly with their regulator. Anyone who doesn't understand that reticence probably hasn't worked at a regular institution, or for that matter, been pulled over by police in the era before body cameras. I'd like to thank those credit unions and examiners who've taken the time to provide feedback. As you can see by the report today, we are taking your input to heart. Many state regulators already do these kinds of surveys after each exam, and I'm proud to say NCUA is now also demonstrating an even greater commitment to communication and service quality. I want to point out again that our examiners play a key role in this effort, not only for exit meetings, but also as resources for improving the agency's work product. I recently spoke with an examiner who mentioned specific suggestions to improve our new examiner software program. That examiner's perspective revealed several concrete and measurable changes that ultimately will benefit credit unions, examiners, and NCUA overall. In addition to thanking credit unions and examiners, I want to thank management here at NCUA and my fellow board members for their commitment to make NCUA a model agency. That concludes my remarks. I have a few questions, either Robert or Shamika, whoever wants to take it. One is, what steps can the agency take to encourage credit unions to participate in the survey? And I'll say this, as I've mentioned to you before, ideally it's embedded in the structure. Like, you can't order an Uber until you rate the last one. DoorDash is the same way. To get your tax return from TurboTax, you have to put your billing information in, right? So everybody pays. It's embedded as part of it. We don't want this to be on someone's to-do list. You know, you want it to be part of it, just like you do for Uber. You know, it's automatic. To embed it as part of it. Thoughts on that? What steps can we take to encourage and raise participation?
I can take that question, Vice Chair Hauptman. One of the first steps taken to encourage credit unions to participate in the survey is to initiate the survey pilot, which we've done, to assimilate credit unions to the process and inform credit unions of the agency's plans to incorporate a post-exam survey process on a permanent basis. More recently, we worked with a focus group of federal credit unions, credit union CEOs and senior staff to inform them of the agency's goals and objectives with the survey and to obtain their input and feedback on the process and the survey questions the agency should consider using. Now, based on the feedback from this focus group, assuring credit unions on the control of survey responses and communicating to credit unions who in the agency will see the responses and how the information will be used will significantly help increase participation. To your point, as well as assimilating or having this credit union post-exam survey embedded as part of the process, the focus group also voiced that very point, making sure the survey is incorporated at the conclusion of an exam, not received, say, 2 weeks after the conclusion of an exam or a month, but incorporate it with the exam as early as possible at the conclusion will ensure and help credit unions in that goal to increase participation in the process. That responds to that question.
Thank you. I mean, in my head, it's like the last step of the exam. If there's a way to embed it, it's like the examiner would fill it out before they've even left the parking lot. It's just, and credit union CEO, let's say, will fill it out right then and there. It's supposed to be short, and because we have limited real estate on purpose, it communicates what our priorities are. I believe our examiner software Merit, we now note, I believe, whether an exit exam was recorded or not, at least for federally chartered credit unions, okay? You think we can at least add it to Merit? That's a way, exam filled out by examiner and credit union, yes, no, checkbox. That's another way to utilize this, right? To say and communicate that this is a normal thing that everyone's supposed to do. We have to take away the, any reticence people have to do it. If everybody does it, then you eliminate the narc problem that, that you're the one who spoke up. Robert, any way we can embed it in Merit, something like that, so it's an automatic process, so everybody does it?
I'm actually very glad you asked that question, Vice Chair Altman. In our current planning process, we are exploring all options for streamlining the survey process so that it is a seamless part of the exam process. So we are working with developers on the Merit tool to determine what options we have for incorporating the survey in the exam process using Merit. This was a point that was made not only by our credit union focus group, as I mentioned in my response to your last question, around assimilating it with the exam process so that it happens, during the exam, but very closely to the end of the exam process. And then it was voiced as well by examiners who worked with us in a field staff focus group, who also voiced incorporating it, with Merit will help ensure participation on the examiner part as well. So we are certainly looking at those options that we have for incorporating the survey process with Merit.
Gotcha. Perfect. I know that depending, some of the ones you spoke of, the other agencies, they'll send out an annual one. It's not immediately after the exam. Like the Marriott email when you check out only works because it's right then. And some of these mechanisms, so for example, in the private sector, like restaurants, they have the problem of, like on Yelp, they skew negative because most of their reviews are the people who pull out their phone at the table and are angry, right? They skew towards the negative. In a situation where you're dealing with someone who has power over you, they often skew positive. We don't want that. We just want to have open feedback. And the fact that we're doing it at all, I think, makes it clear that we are an agency that wants feedback. No, we all want this to be a quick and easy survey. However, I made sure that the final question on these surveys was, what other questions should be on the survey? Will those suggestions from examiners and credit unions be utilized so we make sure we're asking the most effective handful of questions in the limited real estate we have in our short survey?
So I'll answer that question. So
Okay.
thank you, Vice Chair, for that question. We received a host of proposed questions from credit unions and examiners, as mentioned earlier in the presentation. One suggestion in particular was generally broad, stating that there should be more questions related to inefficiencies and difficulties of offsite exams. While there did not seem to be a common theme regarding the topics of questions, many questions explored the behaviors, interactions, and communication of examiners with credit union staff. In addition, some of the recommended questions were more qualitative, including probing words such as how and what, indicating a desire for more open-ended questions. So as the Office of Business Innovation continues engagement with stakeholders, with the focus groups, I'm sure the agency will consider and embrace feedback received for questions to include in future permanent surveys. That concludes my response.
Gotcha. Interesting. Do you mind, were there any interesting suggestions that came in? You said that was open-ended, but we have to keep this short, because we have to communicate our priorities. That, on the apps like Uber and Lyft, right? It's funny, if you give a 5-star review, the things that you're asked to rate, car clean, great conversation. And if you give 1 star or 2 or 3 or 4, they actually change. But it's very important because they have a limited real estate on your phone. They have to be the top priorities, right? And that's a way, I think it's one of the biggest values of this. So we are communicating our priorities. And I hear you, things change over time, like the virtual exams, right? That would not have been an issue 3 years ago. There were things for the pandemic that were unique to that time that maybe don't matter anymore. Were there anything else you want to share? I think it's just sort of interesting what people suggested.
Sure. So if we can go back to slide, I think it was slide 5, where we listed some of the questions that we received. And we can just kind of go through those. Thank you. So as you can see here on slide 5, some of the questions were qualitative, as mentioned, that I think credit unions will probably want to, for the pilot, we had yes or no questions, right? But I think for more permanent surveys, they will like open-ended questions where they can actually give detail. For example, one of the questions here was, how was overall communication with examiners during the exam? I think for a question as such, they would want to go in and give a description of what the communication was like versus a yes or no response to, did the examiner do this? Did you receive this in a timely manner? One of the questions, I don't see that it's listed here, one of the questions we received asks, was the examination helpful to credit union staff? Again, that question, when we received it, we didn't know if credit unions wanted the NCUA to act in a consultant sort of relationship with the credit unions. But again, they do want to find that when we're on site doing examinations, is this helpful? Are they learning anything from this process? Are there any tips that the regulator can give them for future exams? If we see here, how did the examiner interact with staff and board of directors? Again, it's a qualitative question, so they can ask, how did an examiner do something? How did they interact? I think that's the type of feedback they would like to give.
Yeah, gotcha. And I like that if we're going to keep it to say 5, we've got to say what 5 are our best use, right? And like you said, they'll change. I want to mention, I was very pleased to see last year, President Biden put out an executive order. Does not apply to independent agencies like us, but for all the departments in the government, qualitative feedback, just like we're talking about, like, STAR mechanism 1 through 5. For example, a veteran goes to a VA hospital. How was your service, et cetera? And I think it's even more important for government because we don't have market forces pushing us one way or the other. We folks like us have to proactively do these sort of things. But I was really pleased to see that President Biden put that out. Last thing, these surveys questions, are they going to be public on our website? I think that has some value too. Everybody knows that those are our priorities. Are they going to be public?
I can take that question, Vice Chair Halterman. So that's absolutely one of our targets in our current planning phase for a future survey is around communication. And a piece of that that planning includes the possibility of incorporating a specific place on the agency website where we can provide information about the survey process, including the questions that are part of the survey. So yeah, I agree. I think it's important for us to, to provide those questions to credit unions so they are aware of the questions that the agency's asking. Yeah,
that is terrific. That concludes my questions. Thank you again. I can't tell you how much this whole thing is like scratching an itch for me. But thank you so much. Back to Chairman Harper.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vice Chairman. And again, I really do appreciate your leadership on this good governance, customer service initiative. You know, as you were mentioning during the discussion, communications is such a key issue, and we have a lot of examiners who have been trained during during the exam during the COVID period, and we want to make sure that their communication skills are strong when we start going back into credit unions on a more regular basis. And the survey is going to allow us to help measure those performance issues. Board Member Hood, I know you were also a leader in making sure that this was incorporated into the 2021 budget. Why don't you take the floor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I too want to thank our Vice Chairman for really his leadership and guidance and really getting the agency to move forward in the post-examination survey. But before I continue, I too want to thank Shamika and Robert for their hard work and really bringing this matter before the board today for our discussion. Shamika, great job on your first time presenting to us. And also Robert, I think it's the first time you've at least presented since I returned to the agency in 2019. So we're delighted that you all are here. You all, I really want to first and foremost say that the post-examination survey takes us one step closer to continuing with fostering transparency and accountability with our regulated entities. I never lose sight of the fact that our credit unions, you all, they're the ones that provide the bulk of our NCUA budget. So we, unlike other regulatory entities here in Washington or beyond Virginia, we are completely self-funded by the credit union system. So for that very reason alone, I believe that we owe it to them to listen to their feedback, to glean insight, and to take the necessary steps when possible to address some of their concerns. So I'm very proud of the fact that this survey does just that. It gives us that accountability and fostering great transparency. With that being said, I do have a few quick questions. And one is, I know we've talked about the third-party vendors and whatnot. Are all the other financial regulators who are doing their surveys, are they using the third-party folks to collect the data?
I can take that question, Board Member Hood. So we did discuss, reached out to our sister agencies to try to learn from experiences from other agencies on how they incorporate a survey into their processes, and we found most other agencies operate or manage the survey process through the Office of the Ombudsman. But I think one important piece of information that we gathered from at least one other sister agency who uses a third party to manage the survey process is it increases participation. So I think having that kind of separation from agency staff running the process, having that separation appears to increase participation from those who are receiving the survey. So that's one lesson that we've gathered, and we're going to continue to explore options for potentially using third-party service providers or other software providers that would help us reach our goals with the survey process.
Well, that's great to hear, Robert, and I certainly would support that. And I do recognize that you are looking at the third-party folks, because I do think it would give us more efficacy in getting a higher number of respondents. And I might add to the agency leadership and to the fellow board members, if we're going to look at using a third-party provider for the post-examination survey, let's perhaps consider it for the diversity survey that we do as well within the industry, because that's another survey that I think the numbers could be higher if individuals recognize that the survey was being handled by a third party. So I think that there are lots of other use cases that we can sort of glean insight from what the other regulators have done regarding the third party. So food for thought. Another question, and that is, I'd like to go please to slide 4. And this goes under, I would say, accountability. Looking at question 12 on slide 4, what are we doing to require compliance with our 10-day requirement on delivering an exam report after the exit meeting? Because I know we often have deadlines that we require our credit unions to meet. So this is one that perhaps shows that we are not following one of our own intended deadlines. So I'd love to know, what are we doing to require compliance?
I can answer that question, Board Member Hood. So we discussed these questions with our focus groups. And in the discussions with our internal focus group, which included field supervisors and examiners, this is certainly one of those areas that, based on my experience and the feedback received from our internal supervisors, this is something that they look to make sure examiners are following, and that's providing the exam report within the required amount of time. Now, one of the benefits of our new merit examination tool is that credit unions play a role and can be users of merit. If a credit union is a user of merit, then at the point the exam is completed, the exam report is immediately available to the credit union on the credit union dashboard in Merit. So there's no waiting for those who might still use snail mail or maybe forget to send an email with the exam report. That report is immediately available and can be downloaded by the credit union. So that's one of the benefits that I think as we increase our use of merit and complete more exams, and of course, more credit unions become users, we're definitely going to see an improvement in complying with this requirement because credit unions are going to have immediate access to that report at the conclusion of their exam.
Well, that's really good news, Robert. Thank you for that response. And I, from day one, since returning to the agency, have been a firm believer in merit because I think it really can, one, help us use RegTech as we're carrying out our examination duties. We are the only agency that I'm aware of in the FARIA sphere that is using a RegTech approach to really update our system. So it replaces that antiquated ARIES system. So I'm glad that there's another good use case that we're going to see manifesting itself through the use of merit. So thank you. Another question I have here, and Shamika, I think this was going to go to your attention. First, you've mentioned your role as ombudsman, and I must say that since this is likely your first time presenting to the board, many may not know about what you do day to day as ombudsman. Could you maybe let the industry know the active role that you play as ombudsman before I ask a follow-up question?
Thank you, Board Member Hood. I'm delighted to answer that question. Anytime I can talk about the Office of the Ombudsman, I'm delighted to do so. So our office engages in a host of activities, and one of the primary things for our office is we want to increase communication, transparency, and just overall interaction with our stakeholders. The Office of the Ombudsman was created in 1995 under the Rigel Act of 1994, and it required each banking agency, along with the NCUA board, to establish a process by which an ombudsman could assure safeguards exist to encourage complainants to come forward and preserve confidentiality. Our office operates within 3 standards of practice. Number 1 being independence, in that we are separate from NCUA program functions. Number 2, confidentiality, in that information about individuals contacting our office is completely confidential. We don't reveal anything without permission, and we do try to make sure that we let them know that when they contact our office. And lastly, impartiality, in that our office is objective and neutral in the informal resolution of any issues. So in addition to administering and collecting post-exam survey results, the Office of the Ombudsman, again, is tasked with many responsibilities to increase transparency of how we operate as an agency. Some of our responsibilities include receiving and answering inquiries from the public, conducting independent reviews of our supervisory processes. Most times we do receive, our constituents do consist of consumers who go to the Consumer Assistance Center. We assist with information requests. We define options for informal resolution. We collect, analyze, and report data. We also interact very heavily with interagency federal ombudsmen. We do outreach and in-reach to increase awareness of our office so that field staff could direct credit unions to our office to use some of our resources. And last but definitely not least, the Office of the Ombudsman makes recommendations to the executive director as well as the board of directors based off our feedback or any findings we have from our independent reviews of our supervisory processes. So thanks again for that question. I like to highlight all the time that our office does exist and that stakeholders can come to our office for resources. That concludes my response.
Great, thank you, Shamika, and I hope the industry has learned a lot from your response this morning. You recently told me of a credit union that came to your office because they received a DOR, document of resolution, that did not cite any particular regulations or laws or higher authority. We, in fact, recently had an issue like that come before the board on appeal, and the board threw out all of the DORs that did not have the proper citation. Do we have a widespread problem of this occurring, Shamika?
So again, Board Member Hood, thank you for that question. We do not believe there is a widespread problem based on recent reviews of completed exams. Our National Supervision Policy Manual does require examiners to cite an authoritative source on a document of resolution like a law or regulation. Our new merit examination system reinforces this requirement and is programmed with citation dropdowns. The merit system also requires examiners to enter a citation, which is a law, regulation, or some type of higher authority, and citation reference for a document of resolution. As part of their merit training, examiners received reinforcement training on how to properly document citations and references when issuing DORs and examiner findings. Additionally, examination reports are reviewed by supervisory staff prior to release to a credit union. The agency also has a quality control process for examination reports that are reviewed by supervisory staff after the examination report is released to a credit union. Both of these types of reviews would ensure a citation is provided for a document of resolution. That concludes my response.
Great, thank you. And I'm just delighted to know that we are covering this with our examiners, and it seems like there is a really robust review process that goes into this. So thank you very much. I just want to close again by thanking all of you today for your presentation, Rob and Shamika. And again, I hope the industry will fill out the exams following the surveys following the exam. So again, we can't emphasize as a board enough how we really do want to hear and glean insight from the feedback. So thank you. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I just want to say it's been delightful that we've had 2 recent rounds of briefings over the past few months. And I would like to ask that we, given the fact that we have a very highly functioning, highly engaged board here at the NCUA, I would say perhaps one of the highest functioning boards that I'm aware of in quite some time, I'd like to ask that we continue to look at opportunities where there's bipartisan support on things that we can move a more robust regulatory agenda along the ways. I know that we care passionately about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We care passionately about fintech and all that it can do to really open up doors of opportunity for underserved communities. So I'd like to ask that we continue to find common ground for us to bring some very robust meaty agenda items where we're moving policy along for the good of our 131 million members of credit unions that are part of our system today. And again, we have a highly functioning, highly engaged board. So let's all put our sleeves together and move forward along, again, in a bipartisan manner. And I recognize that while there are vehicles and avenues to move things along, I would like to ask that we do it in due course to the degree that we can. Again, let's move the ball forward. And with that, I have no further comments or questions. And just again, thank you.
Thank you so much, Board Member Hood, for those observations. And I know that we are very close that in the near future, we will take up the once threshold final rule. We also have a cybersecurity rule that we are working to finalize as a proposal, that is, and I'm hopeful that it will be on next month's agenda. And of course, I know what's very important to you as well as to the Vice Chairman, Financial Technology and Innovation, and we are working on those, to name a few of the issues. I also really deeply appreciate your suggestion about a third-party vendor for the credit union diversity self-assessment, and that's something that we should explore. One last thing, building off of your observation, as part of the budget process for next year, I know that we're going to be looking at reforms to strengthen the ombudsman role, the ombudsman office, and I think those are important things for us to do together. So I think that there's a lot of common ground on this issue for us, on this board for us to accomplish. With that, that is the end of our agenda for today's meeting. There being no further business, we are hereby adjourned.